Um, so this account code here,
Mhm.
0241, you can see there's nothing in the working, right? So there's nothing in the model, or else
Right.
whatever's here would be here because this is how your model starts.
Mhm.
But there are actuals, right? So if it wasn't for these actuals, this account code would not even be on my display here,
Mm, yeah. Okay. Well, that's cool.
right? So this district, they didn't budget anything for this account code. Here, let me do this. You can just put in 0241. I'll take out all the summing. So this account code right here must be new because it's not in the working, it's not in the model.
Mhm.
It's but it is in the actuals. And remember, it could be in current year actuals or any of the 3 prior year actuals that we show. Sometimes it'll be 000, but in the very last year here, there'll be like a few dollars. So it's going
Yeah.
to show up in the grid,
Mhm. Okay. Well, thank you so much
right?
for following up on that.
And and we're going to talk about an employee that is just like this in a few minutes. But this is where you guys have to decide. And I don't know anything about this side of it. Do we need to budget dollars for that next year? Because it seems like there's nothing currently being budgeted, but there are dollars being spent from current year and 3 prior years,
Mhm.
right? So I mean, I don't know how that works from you guys' perspective, but it seems like some dollars should need to be budgeted here.
Yeah, maybe.
Right, maybe. Anyway, and that's the point of the blue and the purple, is just for reference. So you can see what's been happening, what's been budgeted, and whether or not you need to budget for it in the model.
Mhm.
I know yesterday I always think about this stuff after training. I use words that you guys might not follow, and I was talking about rolling up. That in order for the values, oh, see, that's where I messed up. I switched my scope and I didn't. It's too late now. I didn't unlock. I would suggest keeping this. This is that lock scope. I would suggest keeping this unlocked so that when you do switch, it will take you back, because you can see I switched to just 0241 over here. And when I switched to the employees, it it carried the same scope because I had the lock turn on, and that's kind of annoying. I actually want to go back to the scope that I had. We are hoping to have a remember button here, so you could just quickly go back, scopes that you had
Mhm.
before. You can just rotate through scopes without having to actually change them manually. We'll get to that one day. We know people would like it. We would like to have it too. Um, so now I do want to lock the scope. I was talking yesterday about recalculating, and the numbers will not roll up from the employees. For example, if I went to the assumptions, I get a lot of questions about recalculating. And I went to the classified district benefit plans. We'll go over these in more detail later. But let's say I change their monthly rate for the medical benefits and I save it. If I do not recalculate this number, and by the way, I reloaded my employees and I fixed my benefits. Remember yesterday, these were blank, but I fixed it. Um, we would not see the values. And remember, if you put the mouse cursor in there, you can see where this number is coming from. Um, this would not update with the new benefit values. And this number would not roll up to the financials 0240. You can see here there's 11,016, and it's in the calculated total, which means it's coming, ESP is calculating it. It's coming from this 11,016. But if I do not recalculate the scenario and the employees, if I just recalculated the employees, because let me cancel this, you have just a recalc employees button, and that only recalculates this tab. So I would see the new medical benefits showing up here, but they would not roll up to the financials unless I recalculated the scenario. My suggestion is go ahead and just recalculate the scenario when you want to recalc and click recalc employees. It only takes a few more seconds really to do both. And then that way you'll have a green flag. And if you do switch over to the financials or run any reports, everything will already be calculated. We're trying to get to a point where there is no separation between recalculate employees and recalculate the scenario. And it's not like Excel where all the math is done instantly, because there's just so much math that's going on behind the scenes with all of the assumptions and the benefit plans and the calculations. The computers just aren't fast enough to do it all on a save. If you make changes in the grid, these total lines at the top will update, but just realize that they won't roll up into the financials unless you recalculate the scenario. So I would just recommend, don't worry about recalculate employees, just recalculate the scenario and check the recalc employees checkbox here. The remove empty records, that's if there happens to be like if you create a budgeted position and, well, no, that wouldn't, let me see, how would you get? Sometimes you'll have it, well, a lot of times you won't have it on the employees, but on the financials. If you move money, let's say you move this money to a different account code, you'll get a little box here, little empty box. And I'll go over these icons here in a minute. That means it's empty. And it has to be empty in the model, in the working, the blue, and in the purple. It has to be empty across all 4 data sets. The fourth one being the baseline, which we'll talk about today. And then if you click that button, it will get rid of those for you. Not the inactive ones. They have to be, the dollars have to be empty. So if I come across one, I'll try to create one later and show you what an empty one looks like. Okay, let me step back a little bit. I want to talk about the different versions of ESP. I get this very often. We have a yellow version, a orange. Scott says it's orange. It looks kind of red to me, but he's the boss. And then a blue pre-release version. I would say most of the time you're going to be in the blue. A lot of you won't even see the yellow. That's when the way software works is, let's say today we find an error in the math, or we find an error in the application today. We get it fixed, and the first thing we do is we just create a beta version. That's for me, or it might be for one of you guys who found the error. We can send you the beta version just to check it and make sure that it's fine. If it's fine and we feel comfortable with the fix, then we will roll it up to the pre-release version, which is for wider distribution, which most of you guys will be using, because the pre-release usually has the latest stable, semi-stable fixes. And then the release version is going to be the oldest one, but it's generally the more stable one. So a good in-between is the blue pre-release. It has usually the latest fixes in it, the latest enhancements, the latest features, but you might come across an error or do something that we didn't anticipate that causes an error. And, so we'll try to get it fixed. So you're not going to be in the yellow unless we say, hey, here's this yellow, please use the yellow. And even if then, it's only momentarily while we check something out. So most of the times I would just say use the pre-release. And you really only need to switch to the orange release if there's something wrong with the pre-release that's not in the release. So I know that's a little confusing, but just bottom line is use the blue unless you hear different from us. Any questions about that? I see the yellow. Most of you won't even see the yellow right now. That's just a specific situation when we want you guys to test something for us. Any questions from yesterday's training? Okay. Okay, so let me talk about these icons right here. This icon is a roll-up salary icon. This means that ESP, it's coming from the Employees tab. Over here on the Employees, you see in this object, licensed salaries, I have these people, and these dollars get rolled into this account code. And this is dictated by, on the assumptions, usually for most districts, there's in the object groups here on the assumptions, you have the salary roll-up accounts. This just tells ESP to take these salaries and whatever's calculated on the employees, roll it up into the financials tab. There's other salaries. You notice it's kind of the same one, but it's grayed out. And these are lump sum budgeted salaries, like substitutes and temps. These are salaries, but they're budgeted on the financials tab. These do not roll up from the employees tab. You just put your number that you want to budget in here on the financials tab. And we make this distinctive because that means that there are these calculations, which is this icon, these payroll calculations on this salary. So this is a salary that is having payroll calculations calculated on, and this is a salary. But there's two differences. One is rolled up from actual employees on the employees tab, whereas the other one is just lump sum budgeted salaries on the financials tab. These with the little green plus is supplemental pay. I don't have any for this center, and I'm in just in center 001 right now. And the only reason these are showing up right now, again, because the model and working are empty, but there's actuals, current year actuals. And then these are some 3 other salaries. This is the PERS bond, Social Security. And this symbol is the medical insurance that we talked about a while ago. It rolls up into 0240. So all of these fixed costs that we talked about yesterday, all of these, they roll into the financials, but they roll into different account codes on the financials. On the, let me add, there's also, let's see, fund balance and revenue. I better take out Buckner. And if there's no symbol, that means it's just a typical expense account code. Whereas the revenue and fund balance will have, that's grant balance, I believe. The revenues will have this symbol, and there is no fund balance here, but it has a different symbol. I don't know why it's not showing. It might not be configured correctly. And if you ever wonder what we call those account types. There's three, what you see in your scope here. Object types or account types, the three. You can always add, right click. This is going to be under account because it's not pertaining just to the model type. I'm in a sum scope, so I don't think it's going to show. You would have to drill down. Let me drill down to one. Tuition, take out all the summing. So you can, if you ever wonder what the account type is. And this goes, and all of this feeds back to what we talked about yesterday on the budget element maintenance form here, where it shows all of the elements. And again, I talked about this on the first day. The object is what holds the money and the account type. All of the fund, the elements, the fund, the function, center, those are just for detailing where the account code is. But it's the object that holds the money and the type. So this is where the type comes from. And this is all loaded from Visions. You can change it if you need to. I don't think you will need to be changing any of these. Right. Unlock my scope. Go to the employees. Let me get rid of this scope. Now, well, while I'm here, this little red and blue here, that means that Nancy Hobbs has another funding in this scenario. Right now, since I'm only looking at center 001, she's probably in another center. She has, because you'll notice her FTE here for this funding alone at this center is 0.4, but her total FTE is 1.0. So she has at least one, maybe two other fundings somewhere else. And the way to quickly see where her other fundings are, you can right click, show all. And this is similar to what we did yesterday with the find. It puts her ID in the scope and it does a search just on that ID. And then it tells me her two fundings. So 1.4 and 1.6 for a total of 1.0. So if you see the little red and blue dots next to their name, that means they have another funding. And it's just not in, it depends on how you're sorted. It depends on how your tree is laid out. That's why in the beginning, and again, just like yesterday, when you want to get rid of this layout, you click this reset. Maybe that's why in the beginning, when you're working with a lot of employees, to just look at an overview, just sum to the top, full summing, and then they're all just in alphabetical order. They're not broken out by different, anything different, different elements. So then if they are multiple funded, have multiple positions, they will be next to each other. So now I'm, since I'm not, I am broken out by object. I didn't sum my object. But you can see her two fundings are next to each other because I'm just in alphabetical order. And I didn't sum my object, so that's why they're broken out by object. So the red and blue dot, here's a guy, Jason. He's in license, but he must have another account code in a different object because he has the red and blue. Normally you don't see that very often, but I guess he does. I wanted to show you guys, and you guys probably are seeing this now that it's been a couple of days since you created your New Year scenario. Let me get my scope. I have a good example of changes happening in visions showing up in ESP. Gallagher, Carol Gallagher. So this showed up this morning with a line through it grayed out like that. Because when I created my New Year scenario Monday, remember we talked about the employees were reloaded into the blue and copied into the model. So Monday, she was not there. I'm sorry, she was there, but at this position, she did exist. That's why I have model values for her, and that's why I have infinite visions values for her. So you're thinking, well, where did this come from? This showed up because, and this is what I mean, whereas your blue becomes stale the moment you create it. I go to the daily data set, click add common. She was hired sometime, or put in infinite visions anyway, sometime after I created the New Year, and the employees were reloaded and copied into the model. More than likely not hired, moved, because she was already in there. So you'll notice in the actuals, her old account code is empty, and there's now a new actuals in a new position. The account code is actually the same. So she probably has a different position. The ESP bases these on positions. So this is what I was talking about, where you're going to start seeing, as things change in visions, you're going to start seeing these employees show up that were moved or hired. Now, if an employee gets let go or retires, or I'm trying to see if I can find one. So here's one. So this is probably the same thing where they moved Shannon, probably moved account codes. And this is where you would probably do a right click. Let me get back to Gallagher here. Carol Gallagher, right click, infinite vision details. Because what the reason why it's important is because you have to ask yourself, do we need to budget her at this new position, or do we leave her at the old position? We are doing some back end work right now that might cause this not to work today. Yeah. Okay. I don't have a connection to my to Infinite Visions right now. But anyway, because this has a start and end date, and more than likely, her start and end date in a new position was created. Does everybody follow what I'm saying? They understand how this works. And this goes back to make sure you're not using, in the beginning anyway, the filter and only showing active because she's not active in ESP in the model, you would not show up and you would not see this new line here in your scope. So in the beginning, make sure you're kind of not using filters so that you can see what's going on. Let's say that we determine that, yes, we want to budget her at this account code or position. And I believe, Natalie, you were asking about this yesterday. You can right click, copy funding from actuals. So I'm going to do that. And I mentioned this in the beginning, you always get a warning when you're overwriting your model. This is, are you sure you want to continue? Okay. Give it a note, blah, blah, blah. There's the annualized checkbox there. And we talked about annualization because her days, 130, are not the days she's going to work next year. So if you were to click annualize, it would move her work days to match her position work days. It takes a little bit to do this because it has to create an entirely new record for the model. If you can find a way to group employees that you want to bring over, you can then right click on all of them. You can even use the control key to select multiple and do all of this at one time. Any questions about what we're doing right now and why you might want to do this? So the grid should refresh and you will have model values. There we go. These are blank right now because we have not recalculated the scenario. Right, we have a red flag. I mean, recalculated the employee. So some of this stuff is not being calculated correctly yet. But you can see all of her information from the actuals have been moved into the model now. So then you have to make sure that she now has two 1.0 positions. You make sure you go to this one, right click and activate. Save it. If you don't, you will get a red exclamation mark and a warning telling you that you have employees over 1.0 FTE. So now this position is out of the model and her new position is in the model. The only thing to remember, of course, is the work days. This little symbol right here means it was copied, either copied from the actuals or copied from Infinite Visions. So I've always said, well, since the blue becomes stale as soon as you reload the employees, maybe it's best to just get rid of and hide the blue because it's stale data now, really, and just rely on the actuals. You can do that. Any questions, guys? I know it's really important to understand this because in the beginning, you're going to be doing a lot of this. You're either cleaning things up in Visions, working with HR to, I don't know how it works with you guys behind the scenes about, how do we budget this new funding that shows up? But as the days go on, you're going to see more and more new employees, inactive employees show up on your employees tab. I do want to go through reloading employees. So let's say, you have your actuals, but you want to reload everything you want to copy a fresh version of your employees because maybe a lot of things have happened, they've been cleaned up in visions, and you want to refresh your employees. This is assuming that you have not done any work in the model. And you're going to do this a lot in your new year. So I won't be able to reload because I don't have a connection back to visions right now. But when you do want to do it, we talked about it Monday, you go to tools, employees, reload employees. Maybe we'll do it tomorrow once my connection is reestablished. This might not even load. We have a new login system that we're trying to get up and running for verification purposes. Trying to get away from the older Windows logins and use a new type of authentication. Yeah, I don't even have any of the databases. But this is how you do it. You reload, and then you would check the copy to model and recalculate and annualize. And then we talked earlier about annualization. If you don't do it on the copy, if you go to recalculate employees up here, there is a annualize. I'm going to recalculate and annualize so you can see what it looks like in the grid. This is the process log we talked about. I think it's always good to show. And it will come up with probably some warnings about anybody who's over 1.0 FTE, maybe people that don't have a PER status. When we get to the stepping and somebody might step, if something's wrong with the salary plans, if they step into a lesser annual rate. So there's some action, we call them action items. So these are total salary. Yep. Okay. So these are over 1.0 FTE. So let's look at Shannon Cohen. Actually, let me stay with Gallagher just for a minute because her days should be annualized now. We can see what that looks like. So her days were annualized. Now notice, remember when I brought her over from actuals, they were 130. Now ESP moved them to 186 because if I pull up this tooltip right here, the annualization source is work calendar. So whatever work calendar she is assigned to, the days that are assigned to that work calendar are 186. So it moved her work days to match her work calendars. And this little symbol right there, I have this cool thing called a magnifier. Can you guys see that okay? That little up and down green arrow, not the copy icon, but the one right above it. The up and down green arrow means days were annualized. You can see quite a few employees are going to be annualized. You can get rid of these icons here. If you know, once they've annualized, you don't really care. Hide reconcile status. That will get rid of this little symbol when you copy them over. We used to call it reconcile when you reconcile from one data set into the model. So sometimes you'll still see it as reconcile. I thought we had a clear, I'll have to double check. I thought we could clear the annualization. But then again, maybe you don't want to clear the annualization so that you'll know which employees were mid-year moves or mid-year hires. And of course, when you annualize, all of your salaries are going to increase by quite a bit because you're now calculating quite a few more days and work hours since they're working more days. So make sure you annualize at some point. In the beginning, you might not want to because you're just trying to make sure that everybody's in there, but then you're going to want to annualize. Questions?
Tim, if you had an employee come in, somebody who left already for the year, and you said annualize, is it going to annualize that person as well? Do you have to delete that person, or does it know that they're not here anymore?
Well, you would only know, remember that you would only know if they disappear here in the actuals. Let me see if I can find someone. A lot of these have just moved, but remember, we do not automatically update your model. The only way you would know is if the actuals are all of a sudden empty. These are all supplemental pays. The actuals are empty for a person. And then, but then that goes to the next question. Well, do we need to budget for that position that left? You might need to create, let's say Anne, she left. You could either leave her in because you want to budget for her dollars. You want to budget for these her salary at that account code. So you could just leave her in. It doesn't, there's no problem. You know, the name doesn't really mean anything, but the idea is you want to make sure you're budgeting for the right account code, dollars for that account code.
So I guess the scenario I'm thinking of, so we have somebody who started the year and they left, and then we replaced that person during the year. So both of them are going to show up in the data set, correct?
If they were both there.
They're both there in the actuals.
In the actuals, but it depends on when you created your model. Because if you created your model when it was just the first person, just that person will be in the model. That new person will only exist in the actuals.
Right, but if you had, so if this happened already in the year, right, where we had somebody leave and somebody was replaced,
yeah,
and we copied it over to the model.
Okay.
My question is, are we picking up both of those people as individuals where when we say annualize, it's going to annualize both of them?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So then we have to go through as part of the cleanup on there and say this person is gone permanently.
Right.
Okay.
Right. If Anne gets replaced by Dorothy, Anne's actuals will be empty, but Dorothy's will be there. So then you could just right click and activate Anne and just bring Dorothy into the model. You want to make sure just one of them is living in the model. But if Anne, even though Anne's replaced, if the dollars are, if you're okay with her dollars, then you can just leave Anne in the model as well. And don't worry about bringing in the other person. If Anne was to leave, but you don't know who's going to replace her yet, we have a budgeted position. So let's do this real quick. We know Anne's leaving. We don't know who's going to replace her, or she hasn't been replaced yet. Not sure why it's taking so long to load this morning. So what this does is it will create, actually I should have used a vacancy, but this is going to create a budgeted position. If you know there's a position that you want to budget for, but you don't have an actual employee, you right click, add budgeted position. This will create a placeholder, so to speak, for a position. You can give it the name you want to give it. Replacement for Anne. You change the name. You can change the account code. You can change position, their PERS status, their workers' comp. These are all the things that have dollars associated with them. So that's why you can change them here. You might want to lower the step, because if Anne's retiring, she might be on a very high step and she's going to be replaced by somebody on a lower step. So you could change the step of this budgeted position maybe down to step 3, something lower. So you're not budgeting $2 more. You could change the work days and work hours. Put in a comment, click add. Rocco, have I answered your question?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I would think in the beginning, there's a lot of back and forth with HR or with your data sets anyway, getting your employees. Because remember the model, you want to model what you expect to happen next year. If you have a replacement already, they'll show up. You can inactivate the one they replace, but then you got to know, that Anne is being replaced by someone. So here's the budgeted position I just created. And it was a copy. Whoever you right click on and say add budgeted position, it puts all of their information as the default. So it's usually best to pick someone that's close to the budgeted position so you don't have to do as much work in that form, because it just uses their information as like a template. But then now we have this budgeted position and we're budgeting these dollars for this account code. And then I could go to back to Anne or whoever I did, right click and activate. If it's a vacancy, the only difference between a budgeted and a vacancy, budgeted is you don't know for sure if it's going to be used. A vacancy is, we know Calvin's leaving, but we don't know who's going to replace him. I didn't mean to open this form. Let me close it. This is called employee details. We will discuss this. It's a big, big form. You have a lot more options that you can change for an employee. But I don't want to show it just yet. There's 2 ways when you right click, you'll notice there's a quick add and the employee details add. The quick add opens the smaller form and just has the important properties to change. So now this is a vacancy, and the only difference between the vacancy and the budgeted form is you have inactivate source. Because we know Calvin is leaving, so basically and notice what it puts in for the name here, a replacement for Calvin. So we know he's going to be replaced, but he hasn't been replaced yet. So this is just a way of keeping his dollars in the budget. Notice the budgeted position, it has a B, whereas the vacancy will have a V. And you also notice I have on here, there were a lot of vacancies that came in from Visions. I'm sure you know that you can have vacancies in Visions. So make sure you're not creating duplicate vacancies that might already come in from Visions. So because I checked that inactivate source, it inactivated Calvin, and now I have a vacancy there for him. But again, even if you know Calvin's leaving, you could have just left Calvin in there, because the important thing is you're budgeting the dollars. So I think the employees are probably some of the most confusing stuff, getting the employees set. But understanding, this goes back to Monday, understanding the relationship between the model and the actuals, or the model and the blue infinite visions column, is really important. And of course, these budgeted and vacants, they won't have any actuals. But let me go down to the V's, see if there's any here. So here's all of these vacancies, they did come from visions. So here's a vacancy that doesn't even exist in IV anymore. So now you have to ask yourself, well, was this vacancy filled, and who filled it? So, you know, it gets, here's a new vacancy that showed up in visions, because they're only in the actuals. They're not in the model. So do you want to bring that vacancy in and then inactivate another employee that the vacancy was created for? You know, those are questions I don't know how to answer those. So is all of this making sense to everyone? It's, you know, I think from my point of view, it's really important in the beginning, in your new year scenario, getting your employees set up right, because that's 85% of your dollars in the budget, is all of these values that come from the employees tab. You can see for this district alone, I'm at $140 million. Okay, I'll tell you what, let's take a quick 2-minute break, and then we'll get back, and I want to go over on the salary plans tab. We'll do some stepping and COLAs and show you guys how easy that is. And we'll also talk about a baseline. And if anybody's curious, I'm using in the ESP intro training document I sent you guys. I'm currently on page 9. We've covered a lot of this already. So I'm just going through here looking for things we haven't done yet. So we'll do this in a couple of minutes.
Tim, can you hear me?
Kim, was that you?
Yeah, I was having trouble with my microphone and I restarted the Zoom, so I wanted to be sure you could hear me now.
No, I don't hear you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Tim, quick question for you. You were talking about it earlier and I was distracted, but you were talking about which instance of the database to use, the red, yellow, or blue, and I missed what you said about that.
Rocco, I can answer that. I'm not sure. Tim probably went down the hall.
No worries.
The yellow is got the latest hot fixes, the beta we call it. Usually that's a case. We usually don't like to have people use it, but like in this particular case, we brought Lebanon up and we used our latest database model. So they're having to use the beta. But you would only use that if we directed you to use it for solving a specific problem, or if you came and said, hey, it would be great if we could do this, and we found a way to simply implement it, we might go ahead and build it and put it in the beta and then have you use that. The pre-release, the blue, that's got, you know, at least that's had some runtime on it. It might have a few late breaking changes or enhancements. And that's probably the most common one that people use. And then the orange one is the true release, and we try to leave that one alone throughout the whole budgeting process. So it's a level of I don't want to use the word reliability, a level of functionality, you know, from the orange to the blue to the yellow. There could be more of a possibility to get a pop-up error message.
But for any of the data sets that you're using, I assume it's looking at the same data set regardless of what instant you launch.
Exactly. Yes. And
Okay.
that's hard for some people to understand. Well, if I use the beta, will my data change? No, it's all accessing the very same databases.
Okay. Great.
It's
Thank
just
you.
it's like opening up a different version of Excel, and opening a spreadsheet file,
Yeah, regardless of what version you're on, this down here will tell you which database. So you're always connecting to the same database. You should be.
So Tim, if Kendra just was added and she can only see the orange, how do we just need to contact LBL?
Yeah,
Yes.
they need to put you in. I don't know how it works, but yeah, they need to. They can add you.
Well, yes, for the Citrix shortcuts, yes.
Right.
We
Yeah,
can't have
okay.
we have no control over that.
Okay,
Right.
thanks.
Man, it is pouring snow here right now. Okay. It's not sticking though because it's above freezing, but it's covering quite. I'm glad I'm not going anywhere today. Okay. Let me refresh my grid. Any questions, guys, about the employees? I guess I'm good at covering everything because nobody ever has any questions. Just ask one just to make me happy. No? Okay. All right. So let's, I keep talking about a fourth data set, the yellow one. And let's say I do have my employees set up. I want to see what the COLA and the stepping is going to cost us. So what you do is we're going to save a baseline. Before you save a baseline, you almost always want to make sure you have a green flag. So I'm going to recalculate. And you guys can follow along on your database if you want to. I'm going to do a quick recalc because I want to make sure all my numbers are baked in and working right. Because what a baseline is going to do, it's going to make a read-only copy of the model. It's sort of like saving a column in Excel, and then in the column next to it, making changes, and then you can see the difference between those changes. This is really cool, the way this works. You can save a baseline anytime you want, but you can only have one per scenario. So if I were to do the steps and COLAs and then save a new baseline, that new baseline is going to have the steps and COLAs in it. So just be aware of when you save a baseline. Oh, I meant to look at those employees. We'll look at those real quick before we save a baseline. When the scenario is recalculating, you can navigate around a little bit. It might be kind of slow. Because it's working in the background at the same time you're trying to navigate. What was that name? Cohen? Oh, here we go. So you'll see in my process log, let it finish. Like I said, we do, I mentioned the other day, the ESP does a lot of auditing when it's recalculating the employees. And one of the audits is looking for employees that's over 1.0 FTE. And we call these action items. They're not warnings, they're not errors. They are just letting you know. And if you have action items, the process log will pop up and remind you that you have them. It's just letting you know that there's something that probably needs to be fixed. Then again, if you're happy with it and you're okay with it, then you'll just have to live with these action items popping up each time. We don't currently have a way to just tell it to ignore it. But this action item is telling me I have total salary FTE. Here's the names. So Shannon Cohen. And it will put exclamation mark for a lot of these audits if something's wrong. So you can see she has 2 fundings, different account codes, and each one is 1.0 FTE. So her total is 2.0 FTE. And this is a good place to, so when I copied her in, when I reloaded the employees Monday, when I built my New Year scenario, obviously both account codes existed in Visions. But now that I look at the actuals, which were uploaded this morning, I can see one has been closed. And this is if it was working, I could right click Infinite Vision details. A lot of these is when you're doing this, you'll want to check your Infinite Vision details. Scott, is that going to be working back shortly? Are you there?
I am working on it as we speak.
As we speak, okay. So this is where you would want to look at Infinite Vision details, and more than likely, now it's probably right, but in the beginning, Monday, she had 2 open positions. So this could be a case of where, okay, this one is probably the one we need to budget for, and this one needs to be closed. But just because this funding is not in the actuals anymore, it does not automatically close it in the model. I have to reiterate that often because people wonder if it just, the model will automatically update, and no, it will not. In this case, probably this funding, you would just want to right click and activate. And in the grid, many times you can do multiple edits and then save. There's some things that you do, usually if it's bigger things like moving an employee, it will save it after you, as soon as you do it. Okay, so now her old funding, old account code is gone, and her new account code is there. My exclamation marks are gone, and her total salary FTE is now 1.0. It will leave this in there because she existed in the Infinite Vision details, the blue column. Because when I reloaded these employees on Monday into the blue, she existed in these. So the only place she lives right now for the old account code is Infinite Vision blue columns. If I were to reload the employees, right, this funding would be gone because we already know it's gone because the actuals are gone. She would show up as empty. She would have the empty flag because she wouldn't exist in any of the data sets. See, the actuals are empty, the model is empty because we inactivated it. But she exists right now only in this old stale. And if I want to know the date of this, remember, if you look down here, January 9th at 9/11 is when these employees were reloaded into. If you put your mouse cursor down here, let it sit for a second, it will also tell you when the daily was loaded. You guys, it should say today's date. January, what, 11th, 10th. You can see I reloaded the daily manually last night, 1/9 at 7:04 last night. So the purple is as of 7:04 last night. The blue is as of whatever that date, yesterday morning. Okay, so just again, understanding the relationship between these data sets, when they were uploaded, when they were copied. So if I were to reload the employees right now, this line would be 0 or blank, and she would have this funding right here would have a little symbol next to it indicating empty. And on the recalc, just like on the financials, there's a remove empty records. It would completely remove that record. There is no right-click delete. The only things that you can delete are these vacancies and budgeted positions that we created. That's because you created them. But all of these other fundings employees came in, so they are not deletable. Okay. So when this, I see it quite often, people recalculate, and then at the end, they get all of these action items, and then they ignore them. Because maybe the first time you did it, you said, oh, I'll get to that later. So, try to pay attention to it at least once a week. Because we do try to show you things that probably need to be addressed. And there's a lot more. I don't have a list of, but there's a lot more audits that we do. Stepping into the wrong step, stepping into a lesser salary, missing PERS status, missing workers' comp status. So there's a lot of audits that we do that generally need to be fixed or addressed. Okay, so back to the baseline. So I want to know, I've got my employees set up, and I want to do a step in COLA, and I also want to know what it's going to cost me. Now let's get back to Scenario Explorer for a second. It's up to you if you want to do the stepping and COLAs in your fiscal base. I'm kind of under the impression everybody's going to step and everybody's going to get a COLA, so you might as well go ahead and put it in your number 1 scenario. You don't have to. You can create, right-click, create. You can create a new scenario and do your stepping in COLAs in that scenario. But I've always thought if everybody's going to step in, there's going to be COLAs. Because remember, the more you put in this first scenario, the more, because it will be the parent to all your future scenarios. Because if you don't put stepping in COLAs in this first scenario, you'll have to do it in subsequent scenarios. But that's up to you, however you want to do it. But I'm going to go ahead and do my stepping in COLA in this scenario. And then after this, I'm going to show you a cool way of comparing scenarios to each other. Because in this baseline, you're comparing just basically data sets next to each other. So I'm going to recalculate the scenario. See, remember I recalculated a few minutes ago and I had a green flag, but then I inactivated somebody. And it gave me a red flag because those dollars that I took out of the budget are not in the financials tab as of right now. And I want them to be, I want everything fully calculated. So I'm going to recalculate real quick. You want a green flag before you save a baseline. Believe it or not, we have sped this up quite a bit. We had some districts that were sometimes taking 4 to 5 minutes to do all of this. We check for balances, make sure that what's on the employees is matching what's on the financials. Everything's rolling up correctly. Those are the payroll costs being calculated on each employee. You can notice that Cohen, the person who was over 1 FTE, they're no longer on my action list here because we fixed that. All right. So I have a green flag. I want to save a baseline because I'm going to do something in ESP and I want to know what the total cost of that change is going to be. So you go to tools, tools baseline, save baseline. And you can do this from the employees tab or the financials tab. It doesn't matter. And by default, it's just called baseline. All this is the label. But I suggest giving it some kind of descriptor. I'm going to call it pre-step and COLA. And then you could even type a description. This is going to be to see what the cost of the step and COLA is going to be. I'll just throw some letters in there. Click save. And let me see if so notice I right click, notice for my data sets before this finishes, I only have the model, the blue infinite visions, or the purple. And after this baseline saves, a fourth one will be there. Okay, I got my ding. Normally I work in a smaller scope so that the grid refreshes. So now when I right click, I have this new data set that I just created. And just to prove it, and every column that you have in the model here, you have in this new data set. So if I wanted to see annual rate, right click, baseline annual rate. So now it's yellow. I'm going to put in that delta column. So right now there's no differences because the yellow is an exact copy of this annual rate. So then let's talk about how to do COLAs and stepping. It's done on the salary plans tab. And for this, I suggest just collapsing up to where you're just looking at everything on the plan level. You don't really need to drill down into the grades or the steps for this. So to step people, it's just one simple checkbox. Administrators I'm not going to step them. Classified will step. So you click the box. And what it does when you click, let me expand this out. It filters down to the grade. It filters down the entire nested tree. So that's why it's easy just to do it at the top level and let it filter down. You don't have to go in and check each step. And licensed. There's a top row. If you wanted to step everybody, you could click the top row and it would filter down to every single plan, grade, and step. But I'm just going to step these two for right now. So that's how you step people, employees. It's very simple. And then let's say we want to give a COLA. Administrators will give them 5%. In ESP, if the property has a percent in the descriptor, you enter it as a percent. If this percent symbol was not here, you would put in 0.05. But if you see a percent in the label, just enter it as a percent. So 5% for administrators, classified, they work hard, they get a 7%, and the license work really hard, so they get a 9%. So now we've given these plans steps and COLAs. And then all you do, save it. Double click for your comment. I want to go ahead and recalculate while I'm here. So I'm going to recalculate the employees, and then I'm going to look at it on the financials tab. So I want to recalculate the scenario too, so that the dollars roll up to the financials tab. Click apply. Any questions, please feel free to speak up. After this is done, the check boxes and these COLAs will remain. Because remember, we talked earlier about the way ESP works is we take everybody back to the way they were loaded originally and then reapply all of these factors to them. So if you were to take the 7 out, it would remove the 7%. And really all it's doing is, it is just, let me see if I can, the COLAs, it's not really applying it to the employee, it's applying it to the annual rate, which, as we learned earlier, is gets into the hourly rate. So these hourly rates are being raised by 7%. The annual rates are being raised by 7%. Then it's being divided by 260 times 8 to get the hourly rate, which is obviously up by 7% as well. Whereas the stepping, it actually takes every employee and moves them up a step.
Hey, Tim, I have a quick question.
Yep.
If for some reason you did the stepping and did the COLA, but then you wanted to go back, can you just unclick the steps and obviously, like, put a 0 in the COLA column? Will it take it back to?
It will.
Okay, and even though you would have recalculated the scenario and recalculated the employees, once you make uncheck this step column and take out the COLA, it will take it back to how it was before that?
It will.
Okay.
Yeah, that goes to what I was saying, where every time you recalculate, it reapplies these steps and these COLAs.
Okay.
So by, like I said, it doesn't, we call it bake it in. It doesn't bake in the values. As soon as you uncheck these or make a change, that's why it's so easy to, well, okay, this is 7%, but we want it to be 8%. All you have to do is change it to 8. And it will recalculate everything at 8%. So if we go to the employees, on the refresh, I should see some big changes here in this Delta column, because everyone's, or the people on those plans that I checked should have Deltas now, because they've stepped and they have a COLA. So for this employee, they stepped. Actually, they did not step. I don't know why, but their COLA was, so they're on plan 76. Let me look. Oh, administrator. No, let's see. 76 steps are enabled. I don't know why that employee did not step. And how I know they did not step, oh, they're at max step already. This symbol here means that they're already at the max step. I'm not sure why this person's not showing max step. I'll have to double check that one. The purple, anytime you see purple in ESP, that means it's something that's new to this scenario. So the step is obviously something new that's been done in this scenario. If we go over here, we grab the, where's it at? I'm gonna have to find it. Right click, Infinite Visions, salary plan, plan code. Move this over here. Move this over here. So you can see the people that have stepped, like Leslie Carroll here. She was on 7642. Now she's on, wait a minute, why? I'll have to see why. This should be an up arrow. There's one for this one. Something's happened with, oh, there it is. Oh, I was, okay. It's overriding it when you select the column. See that? When I click on it, it's disappearing. Okay. So I'm using the beta. So this is an example of where we need to fix something before we give it out to you guys. Because when you select the row, it hides the little arrow. But anyway, you can see that Catherine here, she was on step 3. Now she's on step 4, hence the up, purple up arrow. And you can see the total is 8.5 million. But this is only their salary that increased. This does not include the payroll cost. So a good thing to use the baseline for is, let's go over to the financials. And let's look at my scope by object. If you open your scope and it looks like this initially, this might be just a problem with my beta. Just click the refresh right there and it'll bring it back. It could be just a problem I'm having with this beta that we need to address. But I want to clear everything. Let's look at it by fund, then by object, and I want to sum everything else. I don't care about fund balance and revenue right now. So I'm going to take that out. Click OK. And I want to show the amount column from the baseline. So right click, and I want it to be on the left side of the amount column. So you right click where you want to add it. I go to the baseline data set and I add the amount column. Just a second. So remember, the yellow was before the stepping in COLA. Now in the model, we have the stepping in COLA. I'm going to add a delta, but I want to see the percent as well as the dollar difference. So to see the percent, because if I just use this toolbar button, it is just a dollar amount difference. But I want to know the percent too. So you can right click, you go to calculated, delta value and percent. And you can give it a different name for the column heading. The default is usually fine. The colors are a little whacked out today. Okay. So you can see in general fund for the teachers, they all stepped and we gave them a fairly large COLA. So here are the increases. And then if you scroll down a little further, here are the associated payroll costs for those increases. I would have to dig into why the PERS bond went down. PERS bond is usually a weird one. But I suggest when you're making COLAs and stepping, save a baseline first so that you can come over here to the financials and just make sure, because that stepping and COLA is going to cost $10 million total. You could even collapse up to see it by fund. But you know, you want to make sure you didn't actually put in 50% COLA instead of 5% COLA. So it's always good to, when you do something like a major change or you input a factor, to come to the financials tab and just, you know, give it a sanity check. That what you did is kind of what you expect to see. So that's the purpose of the baseline. Just so that when you do make the change in the model, you can see what that effect is going to be. Now, if I was to go and save a new baseline, it would have these COLAs and steps in it. So just remember, you can only have one baseline. And if you want to know, well, when did we save this baseline? Is there a description? If you go to the Assumptions tab and you click on the top level, whatever you click on the left over here, the properties show up on the right. So if I click Scenario Details, I get an error. Sometimes if you get an error, a lot of times you can click Ignore. Tell us about the error, and a lot of times it will still continue. Well, I'll have to see. Okay, mine is not working for some reason. But for you guys, it should be. I know actually, hang on. Now I'm using the pre-release. Go to the Assumptions. Scenario Details. Am I in the same scenario? No. So here's a good example of, I'm in a different version of ESP now. I'm in the pre-release where I was in the yellow beta. But because I'm connected to the same database, my data is the same. You can see in the pre-release, I'm connected to ORCSD test, and in this beta version, I'm connected to ORCSD test. So my data is the same, but I'm using a different version because this is what I wanted to show. It's working okay on the pre-release, which should be working for you guys. When you click on Scenario Details over here on the right, it will tell you the label of that baseline, the date and time, and then any description that you had in there of why you saved the baseline. And if you save a new one, it will overwrite this. So only one baseline per scenario. Any questions about the baseline? So it's a pretty cool trick to use when you want to see if you change your rate, what the actual dollar amount difference is going to be, up or down. But let's say you have different scenarios that you want to compare, because you can only have one baseline per scenario. We have this thing here called Crosstab. And what this does is, the first thing you do is, let me maximize it. Let me clear these. You pick the scenarios that you want to compare. I'm going to go back to prior year because I have multiple scenarios. Let's say I want to compare these scenarios to each other. You just double click them and it adds it over here to the selected scenarios. I want to compare these scenarios to each other. And we'll throw the adopted in there. And then you'll notice you have tabs just like you do back in the main form, and you have a scope just like you do in the main form. So I'm going to look at the financials by object. So I add the scenarios, and you can change the order of these if you want to. Generally, the one that you're going to compare, you want it to be the first one. And I'll show you why in just a second. We switch to the financials. If it's the first time you've opened Crosstab, you might have to reset the column layout. So here's each one of those scenarios that I just added. The fiscal base, and then the 3 other scenarios. A lot of times you want to compare each scenario back to this first one, because the first one didn't have anything done to it. But this scenario has a 1% COLA. This scenario just has a step, and this scenario has an extra day for everybody. So if you right click, and we're going to add a delta column, but it's a special kind of delta column. We call it auto delta, and baseline value and percent. And what it does is it does a delta between each scenario back to the base scenario. So that it's sort of like the baseline, but better, because it's actually showing you different scenarios rather than just one data set within the scenario. So again, you can use this reset column layout if your column, you want to get back to just the amount. And this says model amount because it's just the amount column that's coming from each scenario. Right click, auto delta. We'll just do percent. So for this adopted, you can see the difference between, for license, back in the base scenario, it was 47 million. In the adopted, it's 73 million. It's a 55% increase. I don't know what's in this adopted or why these numbers are so big or different. But so the baseline is really cool. If you do use a lot of scenarios, you'll want to use Crosstab so you can compare them to each other. But it goes back to making sure that you know what's been done in each scenario, or else you don't know why these numbers are changed. We won't go over forecast scenarios, but Jefferson County, let me see if I have a screenshot. She used forecast scenarios last week. And it worked out really, really well. She created these different forecast scenarios with different COLAs, different inflations, and it worked really well. She went 2 years into the future to see what the COLAs and the inflation is going to be. We put inflation factors on her revenue, on all of the expenses, the COLAs and the stepping. And so we have the current year adopted in the current year, her 23-24, and then what each forecast year is forecasted to be. And the way she did that was she used Crosstab, added each of those forecast scenarios, to the base scenario, and then the old save to spreadsheet. And then here's the spreadsheet. Then she was able to save it and email it. So Crosstab is pretty cool, especially if you're using a lot of scenarios or even forecast scenarios. But it's, remembering what is in each one of your scenarios, that's when it gets a little tricky. Because if you have a lot of scenarios, trying to remember what each one has, that's why I recommend using the label, update label. You can even put in a note. Remember, I showed you how to use a note for the employees. You can add a note to a scenario. So you could actually put notes of what's been done to this scenario in here. And you save it and it'll show up as a little icon right here that you can double click and read the note. Any questions about the crosstab baseline? These scenarios that I just used for crosstab, the 1% COLA, 1% step, 1% day, that is an automatic thing that we can create for you if you right click. They're called reference scenarios. And all it does is it takes a copy of your model and it does each one of these. Just so that if you wanted to use crosstab, you could see just a quick indication of what each one of these is going to cost. It saves the baseline and it actually, that's a good reminder. When you do save a baseline and you create scenario and you create a new model, that scenario moves into your model, your new scenario, so that you'll have it available. If you don't do your stepping and COLAs, but you save a baseline, in your next scenario that you create, the baseline will be there so that you can then do the stepping and COLAs and still have the baseline to use. So if there's a baseline, when you make a copy, it'll be there to use in your newly created scenario. So on the salary plans, even after the save and recalc, the COLAs and stepping stay there. You do not, I get asked that a lot. You don't need to go in and remove them. If you remove them, you're removing them, and the employees will go back to their original step and the COLAs will be removed as well. This plus right here is something you want to keep an eye on the salary plan tab, because that means generally everything within a tree or within a plan is the same. The green plus means there's something different in the tree. So I'm drilling down to find this. So here's an example. So everything is 235, but for some reason on this grade, well, it doesn't really matter because it's empty. But see how all the work days are 235, but then they changed to 260 for some reason. Because most of the time, you're going to have the same work days on throughout the plan. Or if you're going to have the same COLA, or you're going to have the same benefit plan. So it's just to warn you, to let you know that something's different and you might want to look it over, right? Because if there were dollars here, obviously it would be calculating a very different hourly rate. It would be a much lower hourly rate if this 260 is right, because everything else is 235. So when you see these pluses, make sure you drill into it a little bit and make sure that what you're seeing is what you expect to see. Because just like the employees and everything else, it all originates in visions. And if it's wrong in visions, it's going to probably be wrong in ESP. So we try to point those out to you. The benefit plans column, because we talked about how the benefit plans are assigned to the employees, and it flows through. If you look on the assumptions, and we will talk about these assumptions, I promise. We'll get more into detail to them. Let me just collapse everything up here. You have a benefit plan section where your benefit plans are configured. But notice I have administrator, certified, classified, no benefits, and superintendent. Go back to the salary plans. You have that same list right here because you assign a benefit plan to a salary plan. So everybody on this salary plan 1 will get the administrative, will get this benefit plan, whatever's configured. This one's using actuals, but we'll discuss this tomorrow or Friday. So a lot of times when you reload and there's a new salary plan that comes in, you really want to come to the salary plans and make sure their benefit plans are set correctly. If they need to step or COLA, make sure the work days and work hours are set correctly. Because a lot of times when you bring in a new salary plan, ESP doesn't know which benefit plan to assign to it. So be sure you check that. Okay. Questions? Nope. Okay. Look at my little trusty list here. All right. So we talked about saving a baseline. A lot of this stuff on this training, we've kind of already covered quite a bit. How to add a note. Scenario notes, we just talked about that. The scope. Oh, that's one thing, back to crosstab. Go to the financials. Let me just change my scope to something real quick. So I want to look just at Buckner Academy. And remember, even if you're summed, like I'm summing the center, you can still put a qualifier in there. So I'm still looking at only Buckner Academy, center 001 in the grid. A lot of times people don't realize that even if you're summing, you can still put in qualifiers in the scope. Yes, it's fund by object, but it's only fund by object only for center 001. But what I wanted to show you was back to crosstab for a minute. If you want to see the same scope here in crosstab here, you don't have to manually change it. You can just click this button and it changes your scope to match what you see in the main grid. So now when you go to the financials, you have the exact same scope that you had on the main grid. So just a little shortcut there. And you can always do remember I showed you how to copy an account code. You can paste it here into crosstab as well. Be careful going to the employees tab because you would be pulling in every employee And if there's a lot of differences, every employee from each one of these scenarios. So you can go to the employees tab. It can just take quite a long time to load. Because if there's a lot of differences, if it's the one employee is the same, that's fine. But if there's a lot of differences in the number of employees between each one of these scenarios, it has to load every single employee, every unique employee, or every unique position funding in the grid on the employees tab. I don't think you'll need the employees tab that often, but if you do, they are there. And I would definitely suggest limiting your scope when you do that for the employees tab, because it can be a few thousand employee, depending on how many and which scenarios you're using, but it can be a lot. And there's a lot, and every column that you have in the grid, you have available to you here in Crosstab. Here's your data sets. Each one of the scenarios, you can go specifically into each scenario. You even have the baseline there. So every column that you have in the main grid, you have on each one of these scenarios as well. Most of the time, you only care about the default one, which is going to be the amount, which is the same as this amount column here in the main grid. All right. We covered baseline. Any questions, anybody? Scope. We talked about filtering. Okay, let's talk about on page 17 about changing budget items. Let me reset. So I'm done with the baseline. I'm done with my Delta column. You can right click hide, or you can just click reset here. And that resets back to the default grid layout. So let's say you're ready to start making changes to budget items. Ideally, the best way to do it is you limit your scope as best you can. Put the object at the bottom, take out all the summing. I'm going to limit my scope as much as I can. Let's see. The only problem when I limit my scope is I don't know if the right stuff is going to show up. Of course. Again, if you change your scope and there's no budget items or employees in it, you'll just get this, no financial records found. And it's almost always because there's the scope that you entered, there's nothing to present. So let me just get rid of this. It's not that many. So now I'm looking at Author Academy Charter School, center only. And by having the object at the bottom, because this is fine. Remember, if you're not sure which element this is, you click on it. So that's the area. I'm in area 320. So here's the account code. This is the fixed amount. The fixed amount is what you're changing on the financials tab. The calculated total is something that ESP calculates. Most of the time, that's going to be employee stuff that's rolled up from the employees tab. And most of the time, I say this, if this is wrong, it's usually best to change it on the employees tab and let ESP recalculate and fix it that way. You can override values. Anytime that you enter a fixed amount over a calculated amount, then you start getting into red pins and overrides. And we'll talk about that later. But it's always better to fix the source rather than overriding. Because in that way, you know, it's everything is being calculated. There's no overrides. And it just generally works better. So let's say, let me find a good. All right, so we'll start with these substitutes. And you'll notice you have the full account code. And notice some are light green and some are dark green. In this column here, you can move. You can move these accounts. You can move the dollars to different account codes. And remember, we talked about light green means it's editable. Dark green means it's not editable. This is not editable. This is only even showing up because there's no dollars in the model, but there are in the actuals. So you cannot edit this account code because there's nothing to move. You can enter a new amount here into the model, but that's the reason that these are dark green, because there's no dollars to move. This has dollars, but they're in the calculator. You're only moving dollars that are in the fixed amount. And the way this works is it's fixed amount plus calculated to get your final amount here. Generally, you will not have that unless there's an override. It's still going to be only a fixed amount or only a calculated amount. Let me find. No, there's not many budget items in here, but so here's one that 0230. It was just budgeted $45 for this account code. There is no calculated amount. And if anything's calculated, you're going to have one of these icons showing up. If there's no icon, it's generally just a lump sum budgeted amount on the financials. But if I want to change this $45 to $100, you have two columns, new amount and variance. New amount, you can just put in $100. It's going to automatically calculate the variance, and we'll use the variance in just a minute. You can make multiple changes. I want to go ahead and change 0242 to $50. You can make multiple changes. Click save, add your note, click apply. Should not take very long at all. So now these new amounts are in my budget. And don't forget, you can always, well, you have the audit, which we talked about yesterday. It was 45, now it's 100. But for these fixed budget items, don't forget they originated in this working. So you can always see, well, it was 45, we raised it to 100. And your comments that you add, they're in the, if you scroll all the way to the right, they'll be in this comments column. So if you're putting in good comments and you want to know why did we change it, you should be able to go over here and read your comments. We also put in your initials and the date and time that it was done. If you wanted to, for the variance column, the new amount column is pretty self-explanatory. But for the variance, you can also, say we want to raise it by $50, you could put in 50, and that's going to, the new amount will be 150. But you can also, and if you put a number in and you decide you don't want to use it, just hit the delete key and it takes it away. But let's say you want to do 10%. You can put in a percentage in the grid, press enter. It will calculate it. It's 10% is $10, so the new amount is going to be 110. You can also put in a negative. We want to reduce it by 10%. So then if you saved it, the new amount would be $90. So if you don't know, if you don't have the math, if you haven't done it already, just do it in the grid. If you are summed in your scope, let me move my object back up. We have a thing called a spread adjustment. And what that does is, because when you're summed, this could be made, this $56 could be made up of multiple account codes. There could be 10 different account codes. Because I'm summed, there could be multiple account codes creating this $56. So we have a feature called spread adjustment. So I'm going to change this to 100. And what that does is it goes through and looks for each account code that makes up that $56. So you can see there are two accounts. One is $6, one is $50. It's going to take this $100 and spread it proportionally to those account codes. So whatever $6 was, we'll say it was 10%. It's going to take 10% of the $100 and that's going to be the new amount. So it takes whatever, so $6 of $56 is probably 11%. So it's going to take 11% of the $100 and that's going to be the new amount. Does that make sense to everyone? So it's not, you can't stick individual dollars in there, but it will take the $100 and proportionally, based on the current proportions, spread it over the account codes that make it up. And then you just click save. And we call that a spread adjustment because it's spreading the dollars out over multiple account codes. And then when you save, that little window goes away. So make sure when you're doing a spread adjustment, you look at that window that pops up. And here, we'll do, this one has a lot of money in it. We want to change this to 2 million or 200,000. But there's only one account code for this one. But make sure you look at this window and see that what you're spreading it to and that you're okay with that. So I was going to say something and I lost it. Any questions? I really had something important to say and I can't remember what it was. I need some more coffee. Yeah, what was it? It was about this. Okay, I'll think of it either, oh, it's almost 12. I'll think of it either in a minute or tomorrow. Yeah, I don't remember what it was. Any questions about, it's pretty easy to change. Oh, here, let's go. For salaries, this one's a little different because remember we talked about it being a salary account that is budgeted for on the financials. So there's actually more to it. If you put in $1,000, or let's say put in $10,000, watch what the grid does. Well, it's going to spread it as well. Oh, I know what I was going to say. We'll get to it in just a second. So the grid is going to calculate the fixed cost on the $10,000. Just to let you know. Let me turn this on. So this $10,000 is going to end up costing 18. Okay, so this number will be raised. It will tell you each of the payroll costs associated with it and what the new amount will be. I thought we showed the total here. I'll have to double check that. Because 10,000 is obviously going to cost you, well, let's see, I can, remember if you click and drag, it will add the numbers up. So actually no, that's not right. It's going to be 10,000 plus this variance. So the 10,000 is going to cost you 11,360 because of the variance.
It's going to be the 7,000 plus those
Oh,
variances.
right. Yes. Thank you. This is it. Yep. So, well, that doesn't seem right either. Oh, yes, it does, because it's already got 2,900 in there. So yeah, so raising this to 10,000, adding 7,000 is going to actually cost 8,447. Thank you. So just be aware when you're changing salaries, you're also going to be adding to your fixed cost. Let me refresh. I'm show you guys one more thing about changing. I've said this the other day. I've seen a lot of people, they like to sum everything on the financials and make changes that way. So if you know what these account codes are, you could just sum it this way and just go through and make changes quickly. New amounts here. Here are, okay, so here is that empty I've been telling you guys about. For some reason, I'm not sure how this got in here yet, but this account code is empty. So when you recalculate and you check that clear empty records, this one, it would get rid of these ones. And they have to be empty in the model, in the working, and in the actuals, and in the baseline. A lot of times you'll save a baseline and then everything will become zeroed out. An account code will become zeroed out, but you won't have the empty symbol because they're in the baseline. And if it's only in the baseline, it will be this, but with the yellow. Remember, yellow is the baseline color. You can always go in and clear your baseline, tools, baseline, clear baseline. And then once you clear your baseline, these will be truly empty. And when you recalc, you can get rid of this noise, these account codes that don't really need to be there. Okay, 12 o'clock. I know we just covered a lot. We can talk about it more tomorrow, but hopefully everybody's understanding how to make simple changes on the financials tab. If it's a calculated total, try to change it on the assumptions or on the employees tab and let ESP calculate it correctly so that you're not overriding values. Okay, if there's no questions, if there are, feel free to email me and we'll talk about it. And Becky, I know I have to answer your question about your salary plans. I'll get to that. Oh, you're not here today. Okay. So anyway, I'll see everyone tomorrow. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tim. Excuse me. Do you have a half hour that I would like to talk with the salary plan that I emailed from Becky?
Yeah.
Okay, anytime this afternoon when you are available.
Okay, how about 2 o'clock? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. Thank you
Okay,
so much.
so okay, I'll see you then.
Yeah, see you then.
Okay.
Bye.